Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Zara Seidler.
I'm Billi FitzSimons.
Earlier this week, the Mexican army killed the country's most wanted man, setting off a chain reaction of violence that has continued in the days since. In today's podcast, we're going to explain who El Mencho was, why he was so significant both in Mexico and the US, and we'll also get across what has happened across Mexico this week.
Zara, when this news broke on Monday morning our time, I believe it was, you cared so much and you were trying to tell me...
It's a movie. It's crazy.
You were trying to tell me why I should care and I wasn't quite on your level.
Yeah.
So this is your chance to now convince us all why we should really care about this story.
We are really escalating the stakes here. We're increasing the stakes to say, you know what? I don't know if I could convince Billi, but why not convince all our listeners? Great idea.
Okay, so to fully understand this story, we need to understand who El Mencho was.
Yeah.
Who is he?
Yeah, so good starting point, El Mencho. I'm referring to him as El Mencho. That was kind of what he was referred to by everyone, by the media, and certainly by groups locally. So we'll call him that. It's not his real name, obviously. But he was one of the country's most wanted men because of his role leading the Jalisco New Generation cartel, which is Mexico's fastest growing crime group. Now, there are lots of different cartels that operate within Mexico, but this one was really significant. The US recently described it as one of the largest and most violent drug trafficking organizations, responsible for exporting tonnage quantities of cocaine, methamphetamine, and illicit opioids into the US. It was this group designated as a terrorist organization by the Trump administration last year. And prior to this week, the US had a $15 million reward for any information that would have led to El Mencho's arrest. And so I guess that paints a bit of color as to how important and significant it was for authorities to find and capture this man, and certainly the importance of the group that he was leading within Mexico.
So the US government wanted him arrested,
Yeah.
but they weren't actually involved in the killing of him.
Well, no. So what we understand about the US's involvement, and I guess we're jumping a bit ahead, but what we know is that they helped with intelligence, but that Mexican authorities actually carried out the operation.
Right.
But the distinction that you just made between the capture and the kill, Mexican authorities had captured him and then he died in their presence. So once he had been captured, they were transporting him to a medical facility and he died in the helicopter on the way there. So he wasn't killed. It wasn't, like when we think of, for example, the Osama bin Laden operation where we understand he was killed then and there by authorities. That's not what happened here. We don't know whether they were intending to just capture him. It seems like they were. But then, as I said, he died a bit later when he was being sent to a medical center.
Okay, Zara, so the killing happened on Sunday. How exactly did that happen?
So I said at the top that it was like a Netflix movie, and I think that it's because I've been watching The Night Manager. I don't know if you've seen it.
No.
Oh my God, it's amazing. But there is an operation, not to give any spoilers, that is quite similar to what happened here. And so it is almost theatrical in how it unfolded. So essentially what we understand is that authorities have been waiting and collecting intelligence on El Mencho and his movements. But it all came to a head last Friday, and that's because authorities found him by tracking someone who was close to one of his romantic partners.
One of his romantic partners?
Yes. I mean, I'm not sure how many there were, but it's been reported that it was one of his romantic partners.
Got it.
But they didn't track the romantic partner. They tracked someone close to the romantic partner who went with the romantic partner to El Mencho on Friday, and it was then that they got eyes on him. So they found it through this partner. So on Friday, she went to visit him, and by Sunday, they had launched this operation once she had left. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said that with that intelligence, special forces raided the house, captured El Mencho, but then, as I said, he was injured in the process and died in transit on the way to Mexico City.
So we don't know if the authorities were intending on killing him during the operation.
Hi, I'm Emma from TDA. I'm over here working on our next podcast episode. And while I do that, can you please subscribe to our YouTube channel? Please, please, please. Now back to today's deep dive.
I mean, we can't say anything for certain, but it certainly doesn't look like that was what was meant to happen, given that he died in transit on the way to a medical centre.
Right.
You know, this wasn't that he died on the scene. It was sometime after that. I will just add that during the raid, Mexico's army came under attack and there was quite a violent clash between the army that was carrying out the operation and the cartel members who were there protecting El Mencho. We know that security forces killed 4 cartel members there and then a further 3 died later, similar to El Mencho. Authorities then detained another 2 cartel members.
Okay, so to wrap up where we are, Mexico's military captured El Mencho. He then died in transit on the way to a medical center. They had the help of the US, but the US wasn't actually involved in the operation.
Yeah.
And then what happened since then?
Well, essentially, since this news became public, there has been this chain reaction with members of El Mencho's cartel almost immediately launching these kind of violent attacks across the country. So we've seen them starting to block roads, burning cars, torching businesses, torching homes. You will have seen that there are images of smoke billowing up into the air. That's part of the arson attacks, and these really targeted, almost instantaneous responses to their leader being killed. They are trying to create, a sense of chaos on the streets. On Monday, schools and businesses were closed in some areas that were worst affected by the violence, and residents and tourists were instructed to stay indoors. There is a very popular tourist area, Puerto Vallarta, where people have been speaking to media about being locked down and told not to leave.
I saw some footage. I think it was people in an airport where they were running as soon as the news broke, and I was kind of confused why that meant that people were rushing out of the airport.
I think no one wanted to be in an open space. No one wanted to be vulnerable to if the cartels then made their way there. They wanted to be locked down, and that's what authorities were encouraging them to do.
Right.
At the time of recording, Mexican officials have said that they have arrested 70 people and killed at least 34 people suspected of being cartel members leading the violence. 25 members of the National Guard have been killed, as well as at least 1 civilian who we understand was caught in a shootout. It's been reported that one of the cartel's leaders has actually offered his men a reward of $1,000 for every soldier they have killed along the way in these last few days. So there is really like a very public, clear statement of intent with violence here. The cartel is not backing down. They are saying, you killed our leader. We will now take to the streets.
Before we go, one other thing that I've seen is that Mexico is meant to be hosting the World Cup this year, and that this could potentially affect that.
Yeah, so Mexico, as you just said, is co-hosting the FIFA World Cup in June this year. Don't know how that happened, that it's already this year. I feel like these things just, Anyway.
It's the Men's World Cup, to be clear.
It is the Men's World Cup. So there are 4 matches scheduled to be hosted in Guadalajara, which is the heart of the current violence. And there are now concerns that with this power vacuum that's been created by the killing of El Mencho and with the violence that has ensued, that it could impact the World Cup, being able to play out peacefully in Mexico. There hasn't been an official statement from FIFA at the time that we're recording this podcast about it, but we do know that regulations mean that FIFA is allowed to cancel or relocate matches if there is a security risk. So it could be that they decide to move those games out of Mexico if this violence doesn't dissipate.
And I think Mexico isn't the only country that is hosting the Men's World Cup.
No.
So that would make sense for it to relocate. It would be easier for them to do that than if they were the sole country hosting it.
100%. I mean, so much infrastructure goes into, games like a World Cup. And so it's important to the host country to be able to build that and to increase tourism and all of those things. But you're right, if there's not a security case to be made, then they can move that to another country.
Zara, such an interesting story. I'm sure there will be a lot more that we will hear about this.
Definitely.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. We'll be back this afternoon with your evening headlines, but until then, we hope you have a lovely afternoon.